All right, Canadian taxpayers, wage slaves, serfs, or subjects, get your KY out. Lube up. Because the government's getting ready to shove it in even further so that they can protect their loyal subject, those who are part of the system. And you know damn well that I'm talking about this enhanced CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan contribution. This bullshit. Like I said, and all you got to do is look through my videos. Look through the history of the Canadian Libertarian YouTube channel, and you'll see I've already made, 2-3 videos about these pension/Ponzi schemes. And I basically explained, before this even happened, before this even came to light, so credibility already there, right? When you espouse something, those truths, objective reasoning, and then this stuff comes out, try to deny the fact that I was right. Do it all you want if you choose to go that route, but whatever, right? But people like myself, if you understand fundamentally like what central planners, what government's all about, it's actually fairly easy. You don't even need like I've said on a couple occasions, I'm not an exceptional human being. I'm fairly smart, probably smarter than most. Well, I am smarter than most, and my competitive nature and my capabilities and stuff like that, I've noticed over the course of my life, yes, on many levels, in many different ways, I exceed most others, right? That's something I've acknowledged my whole life, but it's not like I have some super, induced ego where I think I am some oracle or whatever. But 2 + 2 is 4, and when I can point that out and recognize that when everyone else is trying to think it's 3 3/4 or 4.5, just reality tells me that, yeah, obviously I don't know, right? Trying to be humble Canadian, but at the same time, when you're right, you're right. But anyways, business groups call CPP enhancements a job killer, warn of further damage to shaky economy. So, we're going to and I will read through some of these articles, but there's probably 4 or 5 of them. That's just a headline of one. Let's get on to the next one, though. Let's, about Justin Trudeau's hidden agenda. What you need to know about the CPP reform. Another one here is about the fact, it's all about protecting and taking care of the public sector unions, right? That's really what they're talking about predominantly. Is this whole thing is to prop up the gigantic, and we all know it. If you're Canadian, most Canadians, I think almost every Canadian has someone in their family that works for the government. And if you haven't, at least forget about all the rhetoric that even people like myself or your political propagandists or media pundits or all these so-called economic experts and all this bullshit. Forget all that stuff. Just look at your own experiences, what you've seen in life, with your real eyes, with your mind, with your ears. Who are the people that get to retire early, right? What was that Freedom 55? Who's really getting to experience that, other than, if you're wealthy person that actually created a business that was successful, right? You might get to do that. But the only ones that you're looking around that has actually had the capacity, the ability to retire at an early age, damn well, is government workers. Those who work for the state. Because the government, that's the thing, no business can steal with unencumbered and unimpeded, just steal from anyone they want or force their obligations onto successive generations. The only people that can do that are those that work in government. The statism of religion. The people that believe in that dogmatist bullshit, right? So they're the only people that have the capacity to steal and plunder others or successive generations to prop up or entitle their loyal subjects. these pension plan enhancements aren't to help the lowly masses. You know fucking damn well. I mean, how many times does this have to be propagated and proven time and time again? That all these schemes are never about the lowly sheeple. It is always to maintain the entitled lifestyle of those who strictly enforce and carry out the edicts of their masters. That's what it's all about. And they need a large tent. And because of the growing discourse and discontent and anger of people of what's going on, they need a bigger tent. They need to reward their loyal subjects, because they know if some of those loyal subjects, those who have benefited from government, from theft and oppression, if they don't take care of those people, what do you think those people are going to do? Well, they're going to turn on the typical private sector, the lowly masses, right? They're going to turn on their masters and side with us. And once that happens, if that ever happened, that's the immediate beginning of the end for central planning. So they will do whatever they can to protect and coddle their loyal subjects and serfs. I mean, really, it's just quite despicable if you think about it. But this is the fucked up world we live in today. And I mean, I don't know. Like I say, I think the best person, and I always give props where props due, even though me and Neil McDonald from CBC, he's a CBC contributor. But you know what? I'm never about picking lesser of evils, but I tell you, I recognize degrees, right? And Neil McDonald, at least, I don't know what's in his mind all the time, but I know that he at least puts out some articles once in a while to propagate some truth, some logically consistent, reasoned message. So I have to give credit where credit is due. And once again, Neil is stepping up to the plate, and he's not knocking it out of the park, but he's at least getting a base hit, right? Feds try to quell retirement fears, but winter is coming. Neil McDonald. Modest CPP expansion is about all government can do for Canadians terrified of retiring into poverty. The people who craft messages for government say it's wrong to call the Canadian pension plan expansion a tax. This is an investment. This is an investment, one official told me after requesting the discussion be on background only. It's about our kids. Propagandists, man. The vile and despicable. I mean, they have their moral compass is just spinning and spinning and spinning. Why he insisted his name not be published is mystifying. He was using perfect postmodern government speak. Governments never tax anymore. They raise revenues, which they then invest. They invest in infrastructure rather than spend money fixing roads and bridges. They invest in people rather than spend on social programs or relief for the disadvantaged. They don't spend billions on military hardware. They invest in Canada's security and so on. So, yeah, like I say, it's all about the language, propaganda. That's how they trick. That's how they confuse and confound the people. It's all about distorting language to suit their narrative. The reason for this vat of marshmallow euphemism is plain. The word tax has become a pejorative term, or at least politicians believe it has. Well, of course it is. I mean, tax is theft. Everyone knows taxation is theft. So, of course, as has spend. But tax and spend is what governments do. So steal and redistribute that wealth is what Neil's saying is tax and spend is what governments do. So tax, which is steal, and then spend that and squander it and give it to other people is what governments do, right? And the new CPP enhancement is in fact an expansion financed by a tax being defined as any involuntary diversion of income or wealth by government, regardless of how noble its purpose. Neil, once in a while, man, like I say, that's why, we're even friends on Facebook. I know. At first, I was like, damn, man, I don't know if I should even bother, but I always give people the benefit of the doubt. And when I see any time where they want to speak truth to reason, I mean, I know the kind of paradigm that Neil has to function in, so I know it's probably very difficult for him. You know, think about it as yourself. If you got to live a little bit high and mighty at the expense of others, and all you had to do was propagate the message they wanted you to do, let's be honest, man, you have to be very, very principled not to want to do that. If you can benefit greatly and you just have to sell yourself out what you can perceive as minimally, yeah, that's a tightrope that anyone could fall on. I mean, you could fall on either side of that fence, right? And I get it. And Neil lives in that paradigm. So the fact that it seems like he tries to skirt and walk along that line, but every once in a while he wants to give you a little tidbit, a little bit of honest and objective truth, just to show you that he's trying, right? I don't know. Like I said, I'm not even a psychologist, and I've never played one on TV. But I have to believe, well, I don't have to, but I try to believe that he does these things because maybe he is a morally principled person deep down inside, but he's having fights with those demons, right? That still rest and reside inside of him and in his mind. I'm going to repeat that once again, just like I did in the video before. I'm going to repeat this one too, this line once again, because it's profound. It's only a small few sentences, but is vitally important for people to hear this. And it is profound because people look up to people like Neil, right? So, you know, his words carry a lot of weight. But tax and spend is what governments do, and the new CPP enhancement is in fact an expansion financed by a tax being defined as any involuntary, so forced, right, diversion of income or wealth by government, regardless of how noble its purpose. So yeah, if you steal from someone, I don't care what you do with the money after that, good, bad, or anywhere in between, and I've said this multiple times, is the act of theft. That everything that happens after that, I don't care. You've already been an immoral person. You've already been committed an immoral act. So you can't make up two goods, can't right a wrong. Sorry, even one good, or even half a good, or a quarter good. There's no way to unwind the fact that it was immoral in the first place. In this case, the purpose is noble enough to ensure frightened Canadians a better retirement. Whether it will make much of a difference, though, is something else altogether. Ain't that the truth? Because we heard, I mean, the baby boomer, my parents' generation, heard all this shit before, but now they're, what? All the pensions are underfunded, and now they have to create this new scheme. So obviously it didn't work, did it? Because if it worked properly and everything was done properly and there was the big stories of wealth for these people to retire, well, you would not have to expand anything. But once again, these Ponzi schemes, you got to keep reinventing them because they're a Ponzi scheme. Ponzi schemes are always prone to failure. It's just it's entrenched, it's built in to the scheme, which is why they have to be constantly reinvented, revamped, and propagated on a mass scale to the people, right? Retiring into penury or not being able to retire at all is becoming a raw fear for millions of Canadians. The reasons are multifold. Real estate prices, especially in the luxury or the lunacy of markets like Toronto and Vancouver, rising at several times the rate of income growth. I mean, several times. I mean, hugely. Think about it. Massively. I mean, even if you go at the 13 to 19%, let's go with 19 or 20%. Of these increases of prices, whether in Vancouver or Toronto, because it's that high. If your wages were only increased by 1 or 2% or stagnant, no increases, or even if your wage is the same from year to year, so 2015 to 2016, even if you didn't get a raise in 2016, you might think it's the same, but because prices have been increased on everything else, that's actually, if you're honestly objective, it means you've It's not that you haven't even just stagnated, is now it's decreased. Because the price of everything else has expanded, but your wage increases haven't kept pace. So it means that actually you're going backwards when you count in inflation. People are stretching themselves to the point of extreme financial fragility to come up with a down payment and cover the monthly mortgage installment. That, of course, is viable only as long as prices keep rising and as long as interest rates remain so low as to be nearly negative after inflation. But as the Americans can tell us, prices fall eventually, just as interest rates will inevitably rise. It's guaranteed, it's going to happen at some point in time. Just because you think you can prolong it, and sometimes with central planning and governments and fiat currencies and manipulation, yes, you could prolong that day of inevitable correction and collapse, but it's going to come at some point in time. At some stage of the game, it has to happen. And the longer you prolong that, the longer you push that out into the future, the harsher that is going to be when it finally comes to fruition. But people are like, fuck, I guess Keynesianism, right? We're all dead at some point. A lot of them are hoping that, well, I've already enjoyed and experienced life and lived off of this wealth and all this propaganda, all this collectivism. So who cares what happens in the future, right? Just so sick. You're not even thinking about their kids or grandkids or future generations. Such short-sightedness, such selfishness, such a sense of entitlement, right? And to that, the fact that real incomes have been flat for years, that companies struggling to compete in a globalized world are doing away with the arbitrage of defined benefit pensions, or any pension at all, in brackets, that such jobs as do exist for young people are often part-time or contract positions, and that Canadians are piling on spectacular levels of personal debt, and it's easy to understand the growing insecurity about what will happen on the inevitable day when regular paychecks are no longer arriving. The question is, how much can government do? The answer, simply put, a little bit. And that is what it has just done. It has decided to eventually take about $35 more a month from the average Canadian earner on the promise of a slightly higher CPP payment upon retiring. It's a sort of forced savings if you accept the government's word that higher benefits will someday materialize, which they never have, except for, like I said, except for those in government positions. Those of you in the private sector, I'm sure you all realize, look around. I mean, if you are there, it's profound how real that is. So, I mean, denying reality, all right? But as much as Canadians have come to believe in the power of government to stand between them and the pitiless marketplace, there is precious little it can do to make a home in Vancouver or Toronto more affordable. There is also a limit, particularly in an age of mobile capital, to what the government can squeeze from businesses. Half the payroll tax that will fund the CPP expansion will probably be extracted from employers, but those employers will almost certainly try to offset the expense by paying lower salaries or employing fewer people or by paying even less in benefits. So you know full well. Listen, you might think that you have the ability to force your employer to do what you want, but ultimately, that's just a complete delusion. That's a complete delusion. The employer can fire you. They can hire less people, as Neil is pointing out. They can give you less benefits. There's so many ways. Even if the government requires minimum wages to be substantially higher, the government don't have to, or these companies don't have to hire you. They don't have to, they're not forced to hire you, right? So they just, all people are doing, the lowly Canadians, by supporting this bullshit and government intervention in the economy or pensions and stuff, instead of being responsible and take care of yourself and being self-sustaining and owning up to being responsible for your future, for your retirement, if you pawn that off onto someone else, well, yeah, it's always a bad idea because, I mean, that's the thing. Politicians, they come and go. So the people that are even implementing these schemes now aren't even going to be in power or a position of authority to enforce them at a later date when you think they're going to, when that time comes, when that need arises where you got to start taking from that pool. Like I said, it's all baseless bullshit. It's the biggest Ponzi schemes on the planet. Some of them, I mean, no, fiat currencies is the biggest Ponzi scheme on the planet, but this is just another direct result of that ability, right? To centrally plan, manipulate, dictate, control, and completely manipulate economics and savings and retirement. And there is one other thing governments cannot do. They cannot manage your money for you. Oh, they can't do that. Canadians, it turns out, feel every bit as entitled to spend as Americans, whether they have the money or not. As of the fourth quarter of last year, Canadians were carrying a higher per capita level of household debt than Americans were when their financial system cracked and crashed in 2008. That's the thing. In 2008, the heads of business and corporation banks, they finally said, listen, the scheme's up, it's all over. But in Canada, they've been trying to keep that scheme going even longer, which is why those debt levels have increased. In Canada, your central planners or your corporate and government overlords, they're unwilling. They lack the balls to even try to correct these malinvestments or bullshit central plan narratives. So that's why, of course, Canadians are now they're still living in that delusional bubble. But the bubble is now, they're admitting, is even bigger than the American bubble. And look what happened. I mean, even after that bubble popped in America, which is a country where people still have that entrepreneurial zeal, right? That ambition. But even after that, the U.S. economy still hasn't reached, 8 years later, the levels that what used to be. And Canada thinks they can prolong it, and Canadians are nowhere near as competitive by nature or entrepreneurial at heart as the Americans. And yet we've put ourselves, well, not we, I haven't, but the Canadian people and their trust government have put themselves in an even worse or dire financial situation than even the Americans had. And they think it's going to work out for them beneficial in the long run. What the fuck, man? WTF. Head scratcher. Okay. Aside from the historical high mortgage debt of $1.26 trillion, which is at least underpinned by real estate, Canadians will also carry $573.6 billion in consumer credit card debt. That translates to an average load of about $43,000 per household, much of it credit card debt. Now here's the even more important thing, but that's actually misleading. That $43,000 number is if you spread that across all adult Canadians, right? And average it out. But listen to this. But that's actually misleading because half of Canadians pay off their credit card every month or carry no debt at all. The average debt load of people who actually carry debt is even higher. So if half of Canadians, or up to half of Canadians, and I'm one of them, that don't carry, I don't have a credit card. Don't want nothing to do with a credit card. And I have literally like almost next to zero for debt. And there's lots of people like me. So when you talk about average, you got to take all of us out of the equation. So if you take half that out, think about how high it is for those who do assume and accumulate that much debt. Think about it. Obviously, it's completely unsustainable. And credit card interest rates, unlike mortgage rates, are punitive, around 20%. Just servicing that debt, never mind reducing it, is notoriously hard. Unrepayable lifetime debt has become a business model for credit card companies with the eager participation of spend-happy consumers. Now, this may sound like a paleoconservative comment, but there was a generation of people not so long ago who largely believed in living within their means, not buying something unless you had the money to pay for it. Luckily, I had family members, grandparents that lived in those eras, and grew up during the Great Depression and understood these fundamentals and had lots of history without being obstructed by massive amounts of propaganda, where they actually understood this stuff properly. And fortunately, I had them in my life to explain this to me, and I took that to heart, and I carry it with me every day. Which is why I never put myself in the position that lots of Canadians are today. Or I did earlier on, but I made sure I corrected that and dug myself out of that mess to the point where I'm today, where I can sit more comfortably realizing and recognizing that I won't suffer when all this stuff crashes. A lot of Canadians will, but I won't be among them. My father, a modest paid teacher, scorned credit cards, drove Chevrolets instead of Oldsmobiles, paid cash for them, kept them until they fell apart, and to the best of my knowledge, never borrowed a cent in his life. Putting money aside for retirement was some sort of prime directive. Well, yeah, you always got to take care of yourself in the future. You got just common sense. In the future, when you're old and frail and you can't, whether it was a hunter-gatherer days, you couldn't go out and hunt, you had to make sure you had done the things to make sure that you had either others to take care of you, or you stored up enough value to take care of yourself when you couldn't go out and do that, right? Physically. So, of course, people throughout all of history, how humans have come to be in the modern world, how we sustain living for all these generations and propagating the species is by knowing these fundamental things. That's how, and every species understands that. Like a bear. Take a bear in the winter months and it knows it can't forage and get enough food to sustain itself. Well, it stockpiles that food. There's no central planner that tells the bear to do that. They just recognize that that's the only way that they're going to be able to sustain themselves, so that they'll be able to live through the winter and come out in the spring after they fatten themselves enough and be able to sustain their living, and so that they'll have the energy to keep themselves going over the winter months, right? I mean, just common sense. Putting money aside for retirement was some sort of prime directive. He actually used to read his children the morality tale of the ant and the grasshopper, intoning as you return the final page that you can't count on anyone but yourself. Really, he was talking about self-denial, something the boomers, and perhaps even more so the millennials, have never really been into. Notice, no Gen X point out there, but that's done for a reason, because us Gen X, we're lucky enough that we've seen this. We're old enough that we understand, because a lot of us that did have our relationships with our grandparents and stuff, that were raised in those eras, that they did go through the Great Depression, we understand this, and we watched our parents go through this point and this whole stage of life when they completely denied that reality, or denied the fact that they had to take care of themselves in the future rather than rely on the government. We realized that all these people, they fucked up, and we're like, oh, I don't want nothing to do with it. But the millennials didn't grow up under that kind of same atmosphere, unfortunately for them. Now, fortunately, there are still people like myself that have millennial kids, and I get to help and propagate this truth and this reason to them. But I'm like I've said multiple times, I'm just one small voice in a big sea of those who are opposing the truths that I espouse, and that just want to override truth and objective reason and logic, so that they can keep this system humming along just a little bit longer. So we turn to the government for help, and the government does what it can, which really isn't very much. Winter is coming, as that TV series puts it. And that's the end of that article. So once again, good job there, Neil. I appreciate and respect you for pointing all these things out to the people. You have a much bigger platform than I do. And as long as you're promoting truth and logic and reason, I'll forget about the fact periodically that you're doing it from the wrong place. But I get it, right? I get it. Maybe you're trying your best. Maybe someday you will come around and realize that there's still some contradictions by being part of the system or working for the CBC that lives off of theft, right? I mean, the money that the CB pays for you, and how they can do that is because the government steals from the people to prop up the CBC. The CBC at this stage of the game, I don't know, I can't say 100% certain, but it would not be as big or successful as it is if it wasn't for the fact that they can steal from the Canadian taxpayers to keep their crown corporation intact. That's just the truth. I wouldn't pay for the CBC. There's too much cronyism. There's too much political leaning where they pick one side over the other and they forget about objective truth and reason and being honestly objective reporters or journalists. It's all propaganda these days. So who wants to pay for propaganda? I don't buy tabloids. I've never bought the Inquirer, and I wouldn't pay for the CBC if given the choice. But thanks, Neil, for at least doing some part of disseminating truth and reason to the masses. I respect you for that. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.